Less than 2 weeks into the war, the number of refugees fleeing Ukraine has now reached 2 million, including 1 million children, in what the UN High Commissioner for Refugees is calling the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II.
And with Ukrainian men ages 18 to 60 having to stay behind to fight for their country, the majority of those fleeing are, yes, women and children. I want to bring in now in studio with us on this International Women's Day, the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Deputy Executive Director for UN Women, Asa Regner. It is good to have you here with us. And as we watch what's happening, women and children, up to 2 million now, have fled. And they're fleeing essentially violence, but there's also other things that they're at risk for given the situation now.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I mean, this is a horrendous situation, and obviously the attack on Ukraine and the violence just has to stop. And humanitarian corridors need to be open so that those fleeing can get humanitarian support. And that has to be informed about the fact that the majority of those fleeing are women and their children. So they need maternal health support, they need shelter, they need obviously food and medicine. And they also, from UN Women's side, we also need to support the women's rights organizations in the country, because women are obviously victims right now, but they're also leaders, and they have the right to say what they need and what they want for the future, and hopefully for peace talks and during peace. So we support all of that, and we also try to verify allegations of sexual violence against women, because that is unfortunately frequent at wartime.
It has been an incredibly painful and difficult past few years. We've got the war in Ukraine on the heels of and in the middle of still a worldwide pandemic. And in October of 2020, the UN Secretary General warned that COVID-19 could wipe out a generation of fragile progress toward gender equality. What have the consequences of this pandemic been on women specifically?
So when COVID hit, we saw that women's situation was deteriorated. Women's labor markets were hit much harder than men's, and women were to much lesser degree covered by unemployment benefits, health benefits, and so on. So women have been really hard hit. We also saw that violence levels from their partners during lockdowns increased, and they seem to stay on high levels. We have not come back to pre-COVID levels yet. And I mean that violence just shouldn't happen. So we are in a dire situation, and governments really need to focus on this.
And there's so many things to focus on. We mentioned pandemic and everything that comes with that. We have seen the war in Ukraine, everything that comes with that, but also climate change. You have to keep your eye on the ball there as well. But women, as you explained, disproportionately impacted. I want you to explain to our audience how women have been impacted and how also women can help us in that arena as well.
Yeah, actually, we have evidence that when investments are done in women's rights, we can actually go from fragility to stability. And that is because women are just so courageous and resilient and so prepared to take on leadership in their countries. And we know that when women are around tables for decision making, they actually invest in sustainable societies and allocate more resources for everybody. But women are hit by the climate crisis in many ways. For example, in poor countries, they're often tasked with water fetching. And when water dry out and water sources are further away, yet further away from houses, women might spend whole days fetching water and can thus not have their own incomes. That creates poverty for themselves and for children. Climate change also sparks conflicts. And we know for a fact that women are often consciously targeted in these conflicts about land that can be cultivated, for example, because perpetrators know that when women are killed or shot or hurt, that hurts whole communities much faster. So there are examples of why we need to focus on the gender perspectives of climate change.
Wow.
You were the Gender Equality Minister of Sweden, and you touched on just a short while ago how important it is to have paid family leave for women and for men. President Biden said in the State of the Union address that he is pushing for that. Talk a little bit about why that is so important going forward for gender equality.
Well, in my home country, this reform now it goes back 30 years or more. And so it's almost 2 generations, you could say. And I think that the results we see are 2. One is that mothers do not have to choose between motherhood and labor market access, because the system pays 12 months of leave for the couple, and it has to be shared between mothers and fathers. So if only one of them stay at home, the family loses out on parts of the money. The other effect we've seen is that fathers are much closer to their children. The children have access to both their parents, and this effect stays on. So also teenagers and young men in their 20s tend to seek advice and closeness with their fathers much more often compared to men who did not take this time with their kids. So it's a real society changing initiative. And it's also wise economically. I mean, those countries that have these kinds of reforms are actually among the richest in the world. So that experience at least shows that it is smart economically as well.
We both kind of looked and nodded, because that goes so contrary to what our culture is here in the U.S. But a great point to make. It is so good to have you here.
Thank you
in
for having
studio
me.
with us. Again, UN Women Deputy Executive Director Asa Regner. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.